So welcome. This will be a workshop about automation testing and testing in general in a healthcare environment and on a healthcare product. We will be sharing with you guys some of our lessons learned along the way while working in this very interesting and exciting domain. So without any delay, let's dive into it. If at any moment there's anything that you'd like to point or to discuss, feel free to mention it, maybe in the chat or any way you want. It will be mainly an open discussion. I think that's the best type of discussion for technical knowledge sharing and so on. So let's get going. Okay, so who are we? I'm Victor. I will be, along with Raluca, we will be your host for this evening, for this workshop. Myself, I've been a tester for a while now, have various expertise on various projects in the healthcare domain and not only. I like to be all over the place when it comes to testing, and I like to try different things, different technologies, different approaches. And while doing so, along the way, I've kind of collected a couple of lessons, and I want to share with you guys some of these lessons today, this evening, and hopefully it will be fun. Raluca, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hello, I'm Raluca Vartic. I will be running the technical portion of the workshop today. My test automation journey started about 3 years ago, a little bit by accident, when I was offered what I thought would be a very short-lived test automation role on a project. But things really caught fire. I am very intrigued by the possibilities that automated tests bring to projects. And on the personal side, I also find it quite rewarding. It is a relatively new domain, and it gives me the chance to be inventive. Every project is like a little puzzle that needs to be solved. So I'm really intrigued by how much automation can contribute to a project's overall quality. And I'm really excited to share some of the lessons we've learned, both setting up automation frameworks and maintaining them. So back to you, Victor.
Cool, thanks. Looking forward for your presentation and your demo as well. There's always something new I learn while we go through this, so I think that will be the case even this evening. Okay, a bit of context about ourselves as Macadamian as a company. We are a global company. We focus on healthcare, and we have our own line of products lately, but we do have a lot of experience when it comes to software consultancy. We work with a lot of healthcare companies, helping them develop their products. So that's how we kind of gained our expertise in this domain, in testing, in development, and in a healthcare environment. This is how we gathered everything that we would like to share with you today, and most of the things that we will share are actually practical aspects of our craft. A bit about the contents of this workshop. There are two main parts. The first part will be mainly an introduction about testing and healthcare, and what makes testing special in a healthcare environment and in the healthcare context. And then we will move to our main part of the workshop, which will be a technical walkthrough and presentation of two of our favorite tools when it comes to automation testing. And this is where Raluca will show us her magic. Okay, so testing and medtech. This is the first chapter. What is medtech? What do we experience as being medtech from a Macadamian perspective? So you can see here different domains in the healthcare industry where we act. as specialists, and where we develop products and applications and platforms. And whether it is about operating rooms, electronic health records, clinical decision support, or other hospital type of departments, or it is about your healthcare right from your own home, we kind of see three main things that bring all this application together as software applications. And usually we talk about sensitive patient data. That means that the data we work with and we save in our databases and we consume and we send forward and so on is very sensitive and contains a lot of personal information that has to be protected and which should remain safely guarded. As well, talking about healthcare, we develop algorithms that help the healthcare specialists making decisions on a daily basis. So therefore, as we aid them in doing their job, we have to pay a lot of attention when it comes to the correctness of these algorithms, whether they function correctly, whether there's harm that these algorithms can bring to patients in the end and to people. So that's why testing business logic and algorithms and software that functions according to plan is very critical in this domain. And of course, we as a software company, we do design as well, not just software development, but design as well. So when we design an application, we have to take in consideration how patient and how a physician would use it and how useful it is for them. So therefore, the design that we promote is patient and physician-centric. This kind of influences as well the testing aspects of software development, because beyond functionality and security, we also look into design and usability. Okay, so how does this translate into actual processes and standards? I know we are in this part of the discussion where things might get boring a bit. Standards, regulations, processes, practices. But in the end, we have the freedom to choose how we work with this. And I think it can be fun. I mean, of course, when we talk about safety, compliance, and risk, there are specific bodies on markets that actually govern these areas. So, for example, on our market, because we mainly focus on the North American market, there's the HIPAA compliance, that's the FDA approval process that our products and applications have to follow in order to successfully be delivered on the market. So therefore, we do have some standards that we take into consideration when we develop our software. And you can see there are a couple of these standards that we follow. Some of our clients are certified on these standards. And what this implies actually, in a very short manner, is that we have to track requirements and trace that they've been developed successfully. We have to manage software that's not developed by us, and we have to mitigate risk, and of course, pay a lot of attention to testing and validation. And all these processes influence us in choosing the tools and choosing how to work with the testing tools and how to deliver tests, how to deliver quality of our products. Okay, so one example of a deliverable, let's say, from a quality perspective when it comes to regulations and compliance. So this is a traceability model that we implement on our projects. So for example, as in all projects, we get requirements from our customers. We have a requirements base. Sometimes they are on our system. Other times they are on the client system. And then we take these requirements, we break them, we parse them, and we create actual user stories, because most of the time we are agile. And now we have the user stories that we have to implement. and therefore, and afterwards test. So when it comes to testing, we do develop test plans that actually trace back to each of these user stories, which trace back to requirements and so on. And each test plans have test cases, and on a periodic basis, let's say once per month, every 2 sprints, we release a new version of the product, and we have another test cycle generated. And being able to trace back from a specific test cycle to back to the requirement in the beginning, that's what some of the compliancy bodies look for. Like each release, each deployment can be traced back to the original requirement, saying that okay, everything has passed and everything has been developed according to what it was required, and therefore the algorithms work well, the data is safe, and the design is safe to use by the patients and by the physicians. And there are different tools on the market that can help you with this. If you are going to implement this manually, it's not fun, and there's when maybe compliancy could be a bit boring. But if you use the right tools, all these traceability aspects and the traceability matrix can be generated automatically if you follow a specific process. So this is just another example of how, if you use the right tools, you can make your life easier in a highly regulated domain. So talking about tools, of course, this workshop will be mainly about Cyprus and Postman and how we use it and how we suggest being used on a project. But people, you guys maybe have heard about the testing pyramid and the automation testing pyramid, where we compare different layers of testing, from unit testing to API testing and UI testing, and what's the difference between them and so on. And what we've been trying to do is mapping specific tools on the market. This is just an example of a tool stack that we use on some of our projects, which map to each of these levels. So as you can see, for example, in our case today, we will be using Postman for automation testing on API level, Cyprus for UI testing on UI level, and X-Ray, that's not part of our demo today, but it would be a tool that would go well with these other two. This is a manual testing tool. It's a test management tool, which actually helps you generate very easily the traceability matrix and be compliant with all the regulations and be organized in a fun and very interesting way. For example, X-Ray can be integrated with Jira, and you have open APIs that you can leverage programmatically, so you can tailor the testing process to your own needs. And of course, what we try to say through this testing pyramid is that when we deliver a healthcare product, software product, we do actually need both automation testing and manual testing. And these two types of testing are actually complementing each other. And Raluca will tell you a bit more about how to put in practice this matrix, this pyramid in her example. But there's a way you can build your automation so that you can also perform manual testing in a fun way, and actually in a very constructive way on the project. I want to make a pause here before moving into more practical examples, in case you guys have any questions or you want to just ignite a discussion around the terms that I've just presented so far. Feel free to write in the chat. I can answer the questions right now. Did anyone had fun testing maybe with these tools so far? Do we have a Cyprus expert in the house? Okay. By the way, I will share with you a link in the chat, because I haven't drawn this pyramid here. It's part of an article that I currently went through, and it's very interesting. Let me share it in the chat in case you guys want to read something interesting about these topics. So it's about building an effective pipeline with continuous integration. It's written by the guys at Airbnb, and you can see a bit their strategy in developing automation testing. Okay, so moving forward, as we do want to get into technical side of things, we are now to the second part of our workshop, and we will be talking about Cyprus and Postman and how to work with them. So first of all, we need a victim for our workshop. And in our case, we are going to use one of our products. This is one of our latest products. It's a small product that we actually market right now. Of course, it's related to this current context. It's a COVID screener that's already running in a couple of places in the US and in Canada. And this will be our main software under test platform to play with in developing Cyprus and Postman test cases. So let me show a bit more what it's all about here. Usually we have an open client. Let's say you go into a government building or into a public place, and before entering, instead of signing a paper, you have this electronic form that you have to complete. So you start, you introduce some names here. Let's say I'm from Ontario. Now a couple of questions, couple of symptoms. Let's say I'm good here. I don't have any fever. I don't have any symptoms like these ones. And these risk groups. No. And the last word will be yes. Let's say I'm pretty dangerous right now, but I will keep saying no in the following questions. I have the chance to review my answers and change them if I want, and I can just submit my answers, and quickly I have a do not enter kind of tag in that specific building, and we are going to automate part of this scenario. And now we have the admin portal of this app, and I can see the latest form that's being sent with all the answers, and I can contact this person and see whether they can change some of their answers and so on. So this will be our main victim, as I said, for this evening. And now going forward, I want to pass the mic to Raluca to tell us a bit more about how to implement some automation tests on this specific app.
Yeah, great, thank you. So if we can go back, yeah, I'm seeing some questions already in the chat, so I'll try to address some of those as well. So Melinda, your question, I will address it before we move on to the demo. I'm seeing some questions around having used Cyprus instead of Postman for API testing. I will show some examples of performing requests in Cyprus. It is possible, it is an option. It depends also on how the team is formed. If there is a dedicated team working on the backend, they probably don't use Cyprus. If it's the same team, I see a lot of advantages in using the same tooling. So it is a possibility. I haven't personally experimented actually testing API with Cyprus, but I have tried using it to simplify testing of the UI, so sending some requests without going through the UI and things like that. So before we dive into the technical aspects, a little bit about the drivers for automation. So it's definitely an investment, and I recognize that companies have to be pragmatic whenever they make investments, and setting up an automation framework and maintaining it is a decision that has to be made. Are we getting enough out of this to set up the automation framework? So I want to focus on the two main drivers that I think are the two main reasons we go back to when choosing to invest in automation. And the first one is catching bugs early. And if we have tests that are really reliable, that execute really fast, we can include them in our continuous integration pipelines. And we can catch potential bugs before even the code is merged. Imagine if we were treating things like build failures the way we treat sometimes test failures today. If the build was failing, but I could still merge my code, and then we would just create a bug somewhere for somebody to prioritize fixing the build. And I don't know if some of you are, I don't know who is in the audience, and I cannot see you, but I'm hoping some of you are giggling now because it sounds ridiculous. But this is what we're doing with tests sometimes. And we know that the earlier we catch problems, the cheaper it is to fix that. Secondly, if we have a solid set of automated tests, we can really complement the manual testing effort for releases. And we know that applications and websites today are being released quite frequently. So yes, I do think there will always be a need for some manual testing effort. But having automation in place would actually allow the manual testing effort to focus on areas that really need to be tested manually. And it would give the testers more time to be creative and perform exploratory testing instead of repeating the same steps every time. So regression testing doesn't have to take months or weeks if we have this support from automated tests that execute in a reasonable time and that we can run before every regression. We can have confidence in that release, and we can focus better our manual testing efforts. So now I'm going to start presenting my screen.
I just want to mention while Raluca is presenting her screen, if you have any questions further going, please put them there. Now I'm looking in the right chat. Before I was looking somewhere else. I thought everybody was quiet.
Okay, so we are ready to automate this screener and the automation portal. I'm going to focus on just a couple of scenarios because we do not have a lot of time. So let's look a little bit in more depth at what is happening when we are completing this questionnaire. And I am going to just quickly check that you can see my screen. You can, okay. Perfect. So I'm going to start the development tools and just refresh. So the only interesting thing here happening on the network is this part with the authentication that is happening without any input for the user. You will notice as I move through the screens that there is the subscription, so I have this filled out. But then as I complete this, nothing really is being sent over the network until the very end. When I submit. So, all right, so we know a little bit more about how this is working, and we talked about the testing pyramid. a bit earlier. So how do we approach testing this? We focused a lot on presenting the testing pyramid, and today we were going to just do a demo of API testing and UI testing. But I want to reemphasize that we do assume that this application has a good coverage when it comes to unit tests. So if we look in more detail at the request where we are sending the survey, we are getting a success response. Success just means we have received this questionnaire. It doesn't mean pass or denied. So we know that this logic is somewhere in the app itself. And this logic and all the questions that are being displayed on different screens are highly configurable from the admin portal. So this is a good candidate for unit testing. We don't want to test this at the UI level. Whether is pass, do not enter, or caution is something that is an excellent candidate for unit testing. Also, if we go to this page where we enter information, so we have some input validation here. If I enter something that's not a valid email, I am getting a visual indication that something is wrong. If I'm entering something that's not a phone number or not a complete phone number, I am also getting a visual indication that something is wrong. Now, I don't want to be performing all the input validation testing at the UI level either. These are also excellent candidates for unit tests, which are really fast to execute and are really reliable. So I am assuming that this is all being tested thoroughly by unit tests, and I can focus on everything else. So for API tests on the screener side, we have the two requests. One is for authenticating, one is for submitting a survey. And then on the admin portal, we're going to just look at this screen and the request for retrieving the results, just to keep things simple. All right, so let's start with the screener and API testing. So I have something started already, just to accelerate the demo. So we have the authenticate request already defined. A few things just to point out about the environment. So I am in the build view. This is what we are using for development. And I am in a team workspace. So this way I can share my work with the rest of the team. I also set up an environment. So the solution that we presented, this screener, can be deployed for various clients. And each one would be deployed to a different URL. So this base URL is a portion in this request that can change based on the environment. So this is in an environment variable defined here. So you see we have a bunch of variables. Some we are setting manually, and some we are setting programmatically. I will show you how. And I'll just run this request. You can see that I get an access token, which I can then use to authenticate the next request. So a few things happening here. Actually, this part I will discuss a little bit later, but so Postman has these features where we can execute JavaScript both before a request is being sent. So this is the pre-request script. And after a response is being received. So this is in the tests tab where I am now. And they are also providing some snippets for adding some tests quickly. I already have a test for checking that I'm getting a 200 response status code. They also have this, I could just click here and it would add this test for me. I can, of course, change it. They provide this these snippets that are easy to insert. There's not a lot of support for development, so these are nice to have to get something started. So a couple of things that are happening here. There's one test that is checking the response code, and then there is another test that is looking at the payload and is actually saving the token so that we can use it to authenticate going further. So this is saved as an environment variable. Now, for the add survey, we're again using the same base URL, and we are sending the user information and the answers to the questions. So this is a successful scenario. We can send it. The authentication here is using the token that we saved in the previous request. So one important rule when defining contract tests. So we have one collection for contract tests. Contract tests are testing endpoints, and they should be independent of each other. Now, authentication is an exception, because if we cannot authenticate, we cannot do really anything else. But other than that, in this collection where we're just testing one API, one endpoint at a time, we should not depend on previous executions. So tests should be independent. For this request, so this is the successful scenario. I am testing that I am getting a success status, and I am testing that I'm getting a JSON back that has an invocation ID that is a string. So this is minimal testing. We could add a lot more, but let's keep it simple for just this request. Now, of course, I want to also test a few other scenarios. So I'm going to just duplicate this, and it's going to keep the test that I had before. So let's say I want to test an unauthenticated. So I'm going to leave it like this, and I will have a failing test, but it will be interesting to see what it looks like. And in the authentication, so I'm just going to remove the token. So I'm going to send this, and I can see that I got a 403 forbidden. So I'm not surprised. And I can see here that I have one of the 3 tests that are failing. So here, I can change this to 403. 403. And I don't really get anything like an invocation ID in the body. I could check for, I guess, for the forbidden. And then I can remove this. Let's hope that this is all good. Yeah, and now I have 3 tests that are passing. I can, again, play with this a little more. There's a lot more to test, right? So I can look at the body here and see what happens if I don't submit any answers. In fact, because our application is very configurable, I think this might just work. Actually, let's make this really aggressive and submit nothing. So let's see what happens. It's still being accepted. So this just means we have received your survey. In this case, it had no information. So whether this is acceptable behavior or not, something to double check with the developers. But for the sake of this demo, I'm going to say that this is an acceptable behavior. So I can call this empty and save. And the tests are already successful. What else could I be testing here? I could remove everything from the body. So let's see what happens if I do that. Just going to check time quickly. Maybe this is the last test we do. I think this time it will fail. Yeah. So just for speeding this up, I'm going to remove the tests. And you can see here that we have another test that's been executed, although it's not defined in the tests tab here. So we are checking for response time. Postman supports defining tests at the request level, also at the folder level, or at the collection level. So this is what's happening here. We have some tests that are being defined at the collection level for checking response time. For authentication, we don't want to actually check it because it could go to a third party, and we only want to test the software that we can control. So we achieve this by using a trick. So we have this environment variable that is by default 2 for all tests, but we can override it in particular tests, and we have done that for authenticate. So this is how this magic works. Now I'm going to move super quickly because I can see that I don't have a lot of time left. For the admin, I only want to show you one thing. There is one request that's more interesting in terms of payload, where we get the survey results. So when something like this happens, we have this contract between the front end and the back end, and we want to make sure that it's not being broken as development work progresses. So one additional test that we can do is to verify the schema. So there is a schema validator that's included that we can make use of to make sure that when things change, we still don't break the contract with the front end. And the schema itself, I defined it in the pre-request script. All right, let's see. Now that I have all these tests, I have a bunch of requests, I can just execute the test on the entire collection. And you will see they're really fast. It takes longer for the collection runner to load than it takes for the test to execute. So 20 tests, they all passed. This is great. Let's actually force a failure so we can see. We can filter by tests that are successful and failed. And so this is contract tests, individually testing requests, playing with different portions in the request and testing the results. If we wanted to do something like integration tests, so a user is submitting a survey and then we want to make sure that the admins can see that survey, we are defining a sequence of requests, and we can write tests for that too. And this would be in a separate collection. So in my case, I have just one scenario defined here. I have to authenticate both as an admin and as a user of the screener app. And then I have 3 requests. So I'm fetching the surveys before adding mine. I am adding, so in the first one, I'm just keeping track of how many surveys I have. When I add a survey, I'm I'm generating a random string just to make sure that when I execute these repeatedly, it's not finding users that I've already added. In a real environment where we control the data, we can tell exactly what is in the database, but when doing development, I feel like it's safer to make sure it's a unique user every time. And then on the last step, I am making sure that this new result that I submitted is actually found when fetching the list of surveys again. So I can execute this collection as well. And there's an assertion error, so I can actually show you how to filter on failing tests. It's really useful if we have a bunch of tests that are being executed. There's something either wrong in my logic or a bug. We're not going to investigate right now, although I'm quite curious. And I'm going to quickly jump to Cyprus. Let's first check if there are any questions so far. Maybe a few quick ones that I can answer. There's nothing. Okay, so let's move on to Cyprus. Right, so now we have the API tested. What could we do to test this scenario from the UI? So back to the screener app, there are all these screens that we go through. For each, we could check the UI elements. Really, the interesting one is this, where we enter the information, and then at the end, to make sure that for a pass we get the green screen, and for fail we get the red screen. So let's start with that. I have the survey results. Actually, I'm going to just execute the tests first, and then we can go into and dig into the code. So let's just open the UI and execute from there. Right, I will start this. So we can see it completing a few different surveys, and also testing the admin portal. It's going to complete in less than a minute. It was 30 seconds when I ran before the demo, but maybe the network is slower now. Okay, so all good. Our tests are successful. Here we can, you saw that everything happened really fast. We can always dig in to see what happened. So an interesting feature is that we can always pin a command and then inspect the screen as it was at the moment when we were at this step in the execution. So this is very nice to have for debugging, for troubleshooting. so I can see the elements. I can have access to all that. So I'm trying to see what's really important to focus on, given that we only have 12 minutes. Let's see. I think one of the interesting things in the code is the login for the administrator. So we definitely want to test this login screen where we enter the username and the password. But we only want to test it once. So we don't want to repeat this step in the UI for every screen that we have to test on the admin portal. So one way of achieving this is to actually control the application's state and do the login programmatically. So I'm going to go to the two admin specs that I have implemented fully. So one is just checking the results. I don't have a lot of verifications here. And one is actually doing the login in the UI. So this is the part where I actually test the controls on the login screen. And in here, I log in programmatically. So I do this by defining a command. The commands that are reusable are in the support commands file. So my login command is making a request, and then it's using the elements in the response to and adds them to the local storage so that the authentication happens automatically for us when we run tests that execute this command. And this will make this test super fast. So we log in automatically, we just visit this page, and then we check the results list. Now, disclaimer, this site has not been developed with automation in mind. So if we were doing this from the beginning, we would have really nice selectors defined for all the elements. This is not the case now. So you can see there are a lot of things we could verify on this screen, but I really don't want to write the code for the selectors that we have today. So I really wrote something very minimal, checking the location. And if we do go ahead and we support automation for this product, it would be nice to have nice locators from the get-go so that we can have clean code. And I will show you what I mean by nice locators. We do have them in a few spots. For example, here, if I inspect the element, I have a data-cy attribute that is unique. And this is one of the best practice recommendations from Cyprus to have these unique attributes that are dedicated for testing in order to make sure that selectors remain stable and tests are not fragile. When I have something that is highly dependent on the structure of the page or the style of the element or anything CSS, whenever the site changes a little bit, there's a risk that that selector will no longer be valid. So where I am populating the user information, I can do something like this. So I can just check for the element that has the attribute for the attribute input first name, and this is much nicer. Then I have some code here for populating the user information. I have this defined in the commands because I see the potential for reusing this for other tests as well. So not only when when we complete the survey. And one more thing. So we have tested the integration. So when we send a survey, we check that it's being returned by the backend when we query for surveys again. We could write an end-to-end test for this as well. I don't think it's necessary if it's well covered by really targeted tests in the UI for every screen, and it's covered by integration tests on the API side. But it does make for a nice demo. So we have defined an end-to-end spec where we go and first open the admin site, look at the results, then we submit a survey, and then we go to the admin sites again and check that in fact the count went up. So we have one more survey there. I'm going to pause now and leave some time for questions. Actually, first, let's move to the last slide in our presentation, Victor. Just a few recommendations that I want to leave.
Do you want me to share it right now? Okay.
Yeah,
I have it.
If you have it.
Okay, so technical demo session. I think we had that. And some recommendations from our side. Raluca, if you want to go through them.
Right. So the test pyramid, I think we covered that pretty well. So always start with granular tests at the lower level, unit tests for anything that involves calculations or business logic, input validation. So we want to test any non-trivial code paths. We don't want to test setters or getters. And then at the API level, this is the level that is usually forgotten, the service layer. And it has so many benefits. You saw how fast the tests were executing in Postman. So API tests can be super fast, and they can provide this validation at an additional layer that is below the UI layer, which is really slow. And then we have end-to-end testing. And really, we want to get as much coverage as possible with the unit tests and the API tests, which we can even include in the pipeline. So I'm working on a project now where we have almost 400 tests in Postman, and we are creating the database from scratch every time. And the execution takes 2 minutes. So when it's that fast, there's really no reason not to perform that verification early before the code is even
we can actually answer to Razvan's question before and why we use Postman here. And it has to do with going for a full programmatic approach when testing API, or going for a hybrid approach, which is Postman. And in this case, it's easier to collaborate with Postman in a bigger team, right? I mean, interacting with developers, contracting schemas, and so on.
Yeah, so there are benefits to using something like Postman that go beyond API testing. And one other thing that we are using it for on our project is communicating between the front end and back end developers, and sometimes providing mocks for front end before the back end is even fully implemented. I didn't cover that part because it's not so much related to testing. Right. Then we talked also about trying to shift testing early, so trying to include everything that executes in a reasonable amount of time in our continuous integration. A few other points that I want to make. Controlling the test environment. So we really don't want to run automated tests on the same environment where our business stakeholders are doing demos, for example. We want to have clean data that we can control. We have to be able to reload it quickly on different environments. So it's really important to give this some thought before setting up the framework and make sure that we have dedicated environments. If we reuse the environments, even just with manual testers, it can lead to really to issues that are really difficult to troubleshoot, and we think we have bugs, and we're just wasting everyone's time. And then the first column has to do with seeing quality not as the responsibility of the testing team, but more of a responsibility of the entire team. And I think it's really important to involve stakeholders like developers and product owners early in defining the tests, and also in writing tests. And with Postman, I think it makes a lot of sense for developers to be involved from the beginning. This integrates really well with tools that they would already be using for web development. And when we break down these silos between development and QA, and everyone has accountability, it's just easier for everyone to contribute. It's not just an afterthought. It's something that is integrated into how we work. It's not just the responsibility of an automation that's dedicated to write automation tests, that's isolated from everyone else. So everyone can collaborate, have input, and in the end, we end up with better tests. And just a final note, maybe you are new to test automation. I would like to see this applied on many projects going forward, but maybe you want to start small. So find an area where you have a lot of bugs, where it feels like I've been fixing bugs like this for a really long time. What can I do to defend myself from this in the future? It's clearly an area that could benefit from some defense mechanism, some automation, and maybe start there, because bugs do tend to cluster. And when we have these sort of issues, it's a sign that we can do better. We can do something to prevent this from happening. So those were my final thoughts. I'll check the chat to see if there are any questions I can quickly answer. Am I worried that the frameworks will create more overhead for maintenance? So this is the thing. We don't see maintaining tests as something that's done after. It's done as part of the process. We make sure that tests don't break as we write new code. It's integrated into our process. We already use Postman for communicating between front end and back end. Back-end developers already have to do something to test their work, right? Why not just preserve that as a test going forward and prevent bugs? So there's definitely some work and some maintenance, and I think this is one of the reasons I hear most often people get discouraged because they had negative experience with test automation in the past. It can end up being like that, but it's something we want to avoid. And I'm hoping that I provided some guidelines on how we can prevent that from happening, because we don't want to spend time just fixing tests, right? We want to write tests that are robust and don't break easily. And the first, I think the most important recommendation is don't start with UI tests. Those tests are fragile, they're brittle, they take forever to execute. So I think this is usually what is being applied on projects. Just start with UI tests, replicate what the manual testers are doing, and in my opinion, that's not the right approach. Let me see.
I think being the last ones in the row is an advantage, actually. Nobody kicked us out yet. That's cool. Yeah, so thanks, Razvan, for raising the question about Postman versus Cypress full stack. It's always a choice that you have to apply on your specific project. As Raluca was mentioning, there are certain benefits you get with Postman that you wouldn't get in a full programmatic approach in this specific case, or in order to get it, you'd had to spend even more effort developing that or reinventing the wheel. So in our case, on that specific team, we choose over team collaboration, and we accepted the cost of having to work with two tools instead of just one, and having the collaboration in place and the easiness of just building tests. Because as you saw, it's easier. The cost of developing a Postman test, it's smaller than creating a Cyprus one. Yeah, it's a matter of balancing always. Yeah, that there's
and other projects may be different. So we always have to. There's no golden recipe. We always have to look at what makes sense for the project.
Yeah, it was always like that, and we always start with why, to make a reference to a cool book. Why should I be implementing? We like saying that there's no best practice, there's just good practices. And usually when you deal with complex environments and complex situations, you have to apply a good practice that works for you. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, you can reuse them, but you said correctly, boilerplates. There might be many, or you might be starting from scratch if no boilerplate applies to your context. But of course, if you have something already developed that works on a project that's pretty similar, a team that's pretty similar, I suggest going for it, or even starting from a boilerplate and then modifying it and adapting it to your own needs. Thanks for keeping the conversation alive. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to put them here in the chat. If not, we have some contacts where you can reach to us here. Feel free to write us about any of these topics that we've been discussing. We will be answering back. Raluca, thanks a lot for the demo. I know it was kind of compressed from a time perspective, and you had a lot of interesting stuff to show.
I covered almost everything. There was one thing I wanted to show about the screener, which is an app that's more likely to be used on phones. So I was going to show you how easy it is to run the test on different resolutions, but next time.
Yep. Yeah, we leave room for some more conversations, and you can always bump into us here in Cluj or at online events. World, it's not flat. World, it's round. It's global, and it's smaller with this virtuality happening around. So without any other things to say, if there's nothing on your side, thanks for bearing with us. Thanks for taking part at this late workshop. Well, late for some of us. And it's been great. It's been great talking with you and presenting to you guys here. And we hope you enjoyed our session. Please write us feedback on any means. Find us on Facebook if you want to write us feedback there. Doesn't matter. We appreciate all feedback, whether it's good or constructive or whatever. Okay. See you guys. See you guys around. Thanks, Raluca.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening and nice day. Bye-bye.